Hello, crafty friends, and welcome to my channel, Create with Callia. I'm Callia. Today I'm going to be working on scrapbooking 16 photos for the Inspiration Collaboration Design Team's January mystery envelope. Katie put together this month's envelope, and the instructions read as follows. Create a scrapbook layout using cute as a bug paper and die cuts and include all of the following elements. 1, at least 3 different bugs. 2, one interactive element, for example, a flip flap, hidden journaling pocket, spinner, or pullout. 3, layer it up with a minimum of 5 paper or cardstock layers. And 4, a playful title and include a pun or fun phrase. Pictured are the items that Katie included in the envelope. These first two pieces are from a cut-apart sheet that are part of the paper collection. Katie also included several pieces of the patterned paper cut down to 6 inches by 6 inches. This collection does come as 12 by 12 for the pattern paper. The mystery envelope also contained several different die cuts from one of the pieces of pattern paper. The die set that coordinates with this collection was made in such a way that all of these bugs that you see in my hand are able to be cut out of one of the pieces of pattern paper using the die set. Make sure to stay tuned and I'll show you more. As I look through the envelope, there are quite a number of cute bugs that I can plan on using on my layout. These are the coordinating stamp and die sets. In a moment, I'll show you the full-size piece of pattern paper where these images were die cut from. But for now, I'm placing some of the images that were harder for me to identify in this die set on top so that you can see what those look like when they come from the pattern paper. I forgot this little watering can, so I'll show you where that one is as well. That's right there. Also included in the envelope were a piece of cloud cover ribbon and these ladybug garden epoxy shapes. The epoxy shapes include both the ladybugs and some clear dots that are hard to see on camera. This first sheet of the Cute as a Bug pattern paper is the one that coordinates with the matching die set. Many of the dies can be used to cut out the images that are part of that piece of pattern paper. The next sheet is all of the cut-aparts that are included in this collection. From there, we have several different sheets of pattern paper with A and B sides. This sheet is one of my favorites, but I also love both of these patterns that have berries on them. And I'm really excited to use them for some of my summer scrapbooking. This last sheet is mushrooms and a pattern on the back side that would be perfect to represent a tablecloth. The first thing I'm going to do to start building my layout is to bring in a piece of pumpkin pie two-tone cardstock. When I look at the two-tone cardstock, I realize that I like the lighter side better to start building my layout. I also bring in white willow to use as the base for building my layout. I decide I want a 1/2 inch border around 3 of the sides on both of my pages, so I've cut the white willow down to 11.5 by 11 inches. Then I start laying out my pictures to see if I can get an idea of how I want this layout to look. My pictures on this side of the layout are 3 3x4 and 3 2x2 pictures. I plan on using flip flaps with each of the 3x4 pictures, so I've actually cut out 9 pictures that will be 3x4. I also have 4 4x6 pictures that I'll be using on the left-hand side of my layout. Next, I'm going to cut down some white willow cardstock to act as mats behind my photos. If you're new to scrapbooking, this is the best way to cut your paper to make sure that you can get 4 pieces of photo mats from one 12 by 12 piece of cardstock or pattern paper. This, of course, is for pieces that are going to be larger than 6 by 4. I want a 1/8 inch border around all of my photos, so I'm placing the cardstock at 4 1/4. Then I pull down from the top to just beyond where a 6 1/4 inch measurement would be. When I'm finished with that first cut, I rotate my paper clockwise and then put it at 4 1/4 inches and cut again. Once I've gone around all 4 sides of my paper, I then pull the cardstock out to 6 1/4 inches and cut up from the bottom to meet the cut that I already made. I'll again rotate my paper clockwise until I've cut all 4 sides again. I now have 4 pieces of 6 1/4 by 4 1/4 inch cardstock. Back to my layout, I'm going to ink 3 of the 4 edges of my cardstock to help give the cardstock some added dimension when it's on my layout. I don't want to ink the edge that's going to be at the center of the layout, so I need to make sure that I note which edge of the cardstock it is that I don't want to ink. I usually start with one of the longer edges, and then once I've rotated and inked 3 times, I know that it's time to stop. Because I've done this so many times, usually I remember, and it's second nature to stop before I get to the last edge. To do the inking, I'm simply tapping my cardstock on the ink pad rather than using a blender brush or any kind of sponge dauber. Another way you can save yourself cardstock when you're building scrapbooking layouts is to make sure that you gut any cardstock that will be a border or a base under your layout. Gutting means that you're cutting out the center part of the cardstock. This can also help you save weight in your scrapbook. When I'm gutting my cardstock, I try to make sure that the piece of cardstock that I'm gutting is at least a half inch larger than the piece that will be going on top of it to make sure I have room for my adhesive. I'm starting to bring in different pattern papers now to see what I want to use for my layout. I liked the picnic paper, but I don't think that the pinks went very well with all of the orange that I have in my pictures. I really loved this pattern paper with the snails on it, and even though I don't know that I'll be able to show many of them, I think that some of the scenes that are happening on this paper are so cute, and they're perfect for these pictures that I've chosen, which are from the very first picnic that we took my son on when he was about 2.5 months old. At the time these pictures were taken, we were living in South Dakota. One weekend in the middle of March, we ended up having a day that was 60 degrees out, which was very unusual weather. So we decided to go out for a drive and ended up stopping and picking up fried chicken so that we could have a picnic in one of our local parks. This was my son's first time experiencing warm weather like that and also his very first picnic. Now, at 9 years old, he still loves to go on picnics. And when he turned 9, that was actually what he asked for to be his special meal for his birthday. Even though he has a winter birthday, we end up having fried chicken picnics on our living room floor, and he absolutely loves it. I had just brought in another piece of pumpkin pie cardstock to see if that might be a good color to back my photos, but I realized that with my husband's skin tone, it was making him turn really, really orange. So the orange doesn't work as the matte for these photos. Next, I brought in some old olive, and I like the way that that looks. But I also decided to bring in Mossy Meadow and see if I like the darker green better. As I'm looking at my pictures compared to the pattern paper and the light side of pumpkin pie that I used for my border piece of paper, I realize if I use old olive, I have 3 really light colors, whereas when I use the Mossy Meadow, that'll be a little bit more of a grounding color. So I decide to use Mossy Meadow for the second matte for my photos. This is how that looks, and I'm really liking it. I think that I made the right choice. I'm going to start working on the mats for my pictures that will be on the right-hand side of my page. I want to have a little bit more visual variety, and the pictures that are on the top work to use a pumpkin pie colored mat. I am using the true side of pumpkin pie, so it's the darker shade. But because I have additional pictures of my husband and my son, I'm also going to do a second mat in Mossy Meadow. That helps break up the pictures a little bit and also helps me avoid the clashes with my husband's skin tone. Next, I'm bringing in this leaf pattern that was part of what Katie included in the envelope. I love this pattern, and I think that it's going to add some additional visual interest to my layout to have a second pattern paper as part of the layout. I'm looking at whether or not I want the paper to extend all the way to the edge of my layout, or if I only want it to go to the edge of the white willow. I decide that I'm going to simply bring it to the edge of the white willow, and I also want to make sure I bring a piece in that will be at the center of the layout. I cut off a small strip and I make sure that I also ink the edges with pecan pie, just like I've done with all of my other pieces of paper and my cardstock. Then I use my tweezers to help pull up the edge of the Mossy Meadow photo mat. I try to remember not to bring my adhesive all the way to the edges of mats so that I can tuck things behind more easily, but I did forget to do that this time around. I'm tucking the same pattern paper behind this photo mat on the right-hand page of my layout. I want to have it appear as though the paper goes all the way across the layout, so that's why I'm having it tucked in behind the photo mat rather than behind the other piece of pattern paper. I also think that it helps break up the pattern paper a little bit more, even though both patterns are busy. The leaf paper being only in greens helps make it a little bit more neutral to the eye than the paper that is behind. This is another tip for helping you save paper. You can make things look as though they run across the entire layout, but actually just cut them into smaller sections. Then tuck those sections behind mats or other embellishments to make it appear that they go all the way across the paper. I'm starting to look at what I want to do with the embellishments now. I loved these ants when I first saw them, and so I want to incorporate them into my layout for sure. And I'm trying to decide what other bugs I might want to bring in per Katie's instructions. I also find these mushrooms on the die set, and so I cut those out, and then I'm going to use a sponge dauber on the tip of my finger to blend some pecan pie ink onto the mushrooms to help give them some more dimension. I should also mention that I had cut my left-hand piece of pattern paper to 8.5 inches wide by 10.5 inches tall, and the right-hand piece of the bug paper is cut to 9.25 inches wide by 10.5 inches tall. Using these dimensions help make sure that you could see the two bugs that are on top of the mushroom cap having tea visible on my layout. I thought that that would also be perfect for representing our family picnic in the photos. I used the Sweet Bugs die set to also cut these mushroom caps from the die sheet using Cajun Craze cardstock. I'm adding some color to the tops of the mushrooms as well, just to make sure that they'll have some dimension. Next, I'm bringing in the Terrific Toadstools Builder Punch. I'm going to punch out both white willow for the stems, and then I'm going to punch out the tops of these mushrooms using Poppy Parade cardstock. Once I have them punched out, I'll do the same as I have done with the other mushrooms and use some pecan pie ink to provide some dimension on the stem and on the mushroom caps. One of the instructions for this layout was to use a playful title that includes a pun. So I've created a title using Cricut Design Space's print and cut feature. I decided to title my layout Ant-astic Day for a Picnic, which I thought met the requirement perfectly. I printed my title on white willow cardstock using the hex codes for pumpkin pie and mossy meadow. I then created a border for the title using a true shade of pumpkin pie cardstock, which is the darker side. Last, I made sure to ink around the title, just like I will do with most of my other embellishments. Next, I'm bringing in the Stylish Shapes dies. I love my title, but I feel like it needs something more behind it, so I used the largest die to cut a circle out of white willow cardstock. I think I'm going to put my ants here because that helps the title make more sense, and having the white space behind them makes them more visible. Once I have my ants placed, then I'm ready to start bringing in the mushrooms to see how I'm going to organize those. When I'm working on my embellishment clusters, I prefer to start off by dry fitting things, which means putting them into the place I think that they'll go before gluing them down so that I have the opportunity to move things if I want. I like to make sure that I have an idea of what all three embellishment clusters will look like before I start gluing things down, just in case something feels like it'll fit better in a different location, or in case I decide to completely switch gears and go with different embellishments. For the cluster I'm currently working on, I once again used the largest die from the Stylish Shapes die set to cut a circle out of the dark side of pumpkin pie, and then use the next smaller die to cut a circle out of white willow. I'm planning on having this be my journaling spot. I'm also using the caterpillar with a leaf and the mushrooms that were able to be cut out of the pattern paper using the die set. Back on the left-hand side of my layout, I realized that the circle needs to move over so it's a little bit more centered behind my title, and that will help me bring in 5 mushrooms to use for the embellishment cluster on this side. Using an odd number of repeating elements is visually pleasing to your eye, so that's why I'm planning on using 5 mushrooms in the left-hand embellishment cluster and 3 in the right-hand cluster. You may have also noticed in the right-hand cluster that part of what I'm covering up is a spot that could have been used for another 2 by 2 picture. However, I didn't have another one that I wanted to put on this particular scrapbook layout. If I had had another picture, I could also move the circle over further, or I could move it up to where the 2 bugs currently are. I've started working on the third of my embellishment clusters by bringing in a tag die from my stash. I used it to cut a piece of the leaf paper and some more of the darker shade of pumpkin pie. When you're creating embellishment clusters, it's a good idea to make sure that you have repeating elements in each of the clusters. So that's why I've included orange. I have orange in each of my clusters, and then because the clusters are on the leaf paper, it makes sense to bring the leaf paper up to the top as well. Using the tags is also a perfect way for me to bring in the cloud cover ribbon that was included in the envelope. I've tied a piece of white ribbon around the cloud cover to help the ribbon feel more finished. I'm also going to cut it off at an angle to help prevent it from unraveling, and then I'm going to use a micro glue dot to help keep the ends of the ribbon where I actually want them to be visible on the page. This helps make sure that the ribbon ends end up able to be seen and aren't being covered up by each other. I'm going to use the same technique to finish off the top of the other tag. Next, I'm going to bring in the Beach Time stamp set to help finish my embellishment clusters. I'm using the stamp that says Notes to stamp on my journaling spot in Mossy Meadow. I think that that's a perfect little addition to this embellishment cluster. Then I'm going to bring in the smallest pennant from the Stylish Shape dies and stamp I Heart Sunshine on that in Mossy Meadow. I'm bringing that up to the top embellishment cluster to help that cluster feel a little bit more complete. When I'm thinking about creating my embellishment clusters, I tend to have my largest cluster be on the left-hand side of my page where my title area is. Then I create a smaller embellishment cluster for the middle area of my layout. And then finally, I create my second largest embellishment cluster on the far right-hand side of my page. I also try to make sure to place the embellishments so that they create a triangle, as that helps your eye travel around the page and is visually pleasing. I've added in the ladybug reading a book, which I think helps complete that embellishment cluster. Next, I'm bringing in a white gel pen to add some additional visual interest to my mushrooms. I'm just placing small white dots from the gel pen on each of the mushroom caps. I'm using more dots in a tighter cluster near the tops of each of the mushrooms, and then as I work my way down, I'm making the dots a little bit further apart to help them look more like real mushrooms. This is one of those small details that can make a huge difference in how your layout looks. I'm loving the way that this is turning out, and so I'm going to keep going and make sure that I put dots on each of the mushrooms. I've now added dots to the right-hand mushrooms as well, and I'm ready to bring in the Ladybug Garden epoxy shapes. If you have the Take Your Pick tool, I'm using the pointy end to help me get the epoxy shapes off of the carrier sheet. If you aren't sure where the pointy end is located, it's on the opposite side of the spatula end of the tool. I'm going to place 2 of the ladybugs in each of my embellishment cluster areas because I think that that's going to look nice with this layout. A full list of all of the products that I've used will be located in the description box below, so make sure to check that out once you're done watching the video. I'm going to also bring in the clear epoxy dots that are part of this set. I'm placing them in groupings of 3, although you can't see them on camera. And with that, I think this layout is complete. I feel like I've incorporated all of the elements that Katie required in the challenge. I love that I'm incorporating several different flip flaps on this, and I made sure to leave space so that you can see the mats between the flip flaps and they won't overlap once they're in my album. I've also had to remember to pay attention while building my embellishment clusters to where the flip flaps would be so that I wouldn't be covering embellishments. I've got my visual triangle with my 3 different areas of embellishments, and I'm so pleased with how both the bugs and mushrooms turned out. If you've enjoyed watching this video, please make sure to like and subscribe to my channel. It helps me know which layouts you've enjoyed. Make sure you also check out the playlist to see what the other designers created for this challenge. Thanks for watching. Have a great day and craft on.